Okay, let's go ahead and get started. First off, I want to extend a thank you to everyone that's taking time to join us today for the June session of our Amazon QuickSight customer webinar. My name is Quentin Alsbury. I'm a product manager with the QuickSight team, and presenting with me today is Jesse Gebhardt, who is a business development manager for the QuickSight team as well. This session will cover all of the new features that have become available. Actually, we'll talk about some features that were released towards the end of May, as well as features that are just coming online now for June. Feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A panel, and we'll try to get to them during the session, and we'll also save a little bit of time at the end of the session for live Q&A as well. A couple of more housekeeping notes just before we get started. You can always find a complete list of all the new features that were added on the Amazon QuickSight website. So that's aws.amazon.com/QuickSight. And if you go under the resources section, there's a link to what's new, and that'll take you into the QuickSight documentation mini site where you'll find a list of all the things that are new on a monthly basis. This is added. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand the session off over to Jesse to get started on walking us through all the new features that have been added this month. Jesse, take it away.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm excited to guide you through some of the powerful new features that we're going to be launching in QuickSight in June 2019. For each of these, we'll step through them and give a high-level description of what the feature is, followed by a demonstration in QuickSight of how to actually use the feature itself. For our first one that we're going to get started with, multiple sheets, also known as tabs, let's jump into this first one. So we can see a quick screenshot here on the top of how the tabs are displayed to your reader users. So think of it as within a given dashboard or analysis, you can now organize that content differently and more efficiently by having these tabs and sheets within there. So within each sheet, you can add up to 30 visualizations, and you can add up to 20 sheets for your entire dashboard. You can expose parameter controls that show up across each one of the sheets. So if I make a parameter selection on one of the sheets, it will be reflected on my other sheets here. I can also set drilling actions or URL actions to be able to drill from one tab to another and send some filters from one sheet to another to provide that type of navigation and drill down experience. So we'll take a look at how both of those are applied. And for the URL actions specifically, we're going to follow this with our second feature of the presentation, which is some custom options for the URL actions. All right, so let's take a look at how this one looks in QuickSight. So again, here you can see that I have my sheets displayed on the top of my dashboard here. I can step through them just by clicking on them. So I have a summary tab, I have my details tab, I have my metric board, which all of my different KPIs and monitoring type metrics. But nonetheless, it's very easy for me to organize the content so that my users can find what they need. If I were to make a selection of one of my parameters on my controls here, and I select enterprise, for instance, we can see that when I step over to one of my other tabs, that selection is consistent. You can also drill down between these tabs. So for instance, from here, I have some drill downs built in. So if I wanted to go select a particular customer and see the details or the orders for that customer, in this case, it's bringing me to my details tab and applying some filters there. So we can see that we're just filtered on this one particular customer. Similarly, we have those drill downs built in on all these visuals. So if I wanted to go drill down by city instead, so here now just drill down on New York. So that's a quick high level on how the sheets work from a reader perspective. What we'll do is let's show how you actually create these. So now we're in the analysis, we're in our editing mode. So you can see I have my tabs here on the top. If I want to make a new tab, I can click this little add button. It's going to make me a new tab here and add a quick visualization to it. And then if I wanted to rename it, and I can also reorder them. So if I preferred to actually put this one up closer to the front, and I can move them around as well. So if I prefer that I want to take my trend tab and move it a little bit closer to the front, you can simply drag and drop these to reorder them. Great, so that is the new feature of tabs. Very easy to implement, but is going to have a great impact on both of our author users and our reader users, just in being able to organize your dashboards and bring more information into them and to convey that information in a clearer and more efficient way. So the next feature we're going to cover is URL action options. So while URL actions had existed before, the behavior was that it would always open a new browser tab, which was fine for some scenarios, but there were lots of scenarios where I was maybe drilling down from one dashboard to another, and I preferred to keep that drill down within the same browser tab. Or maybe there's some situations where I'd want to open a completely new browser window instead of a new browser tab. So we've added those options into the URL actions themselves so you can have that control. So let's take a look at how this is implemented. So we saw an example of this when we were displaying or demonstrating the new tabs feature. Whereas if I make a selection here and drill down to that customer, it keeps me within the same browser tab, but brings me over to my other QuickSight tab and applies that filtering. And let's see how that actually works. So if I open the URL actions for this visualization, notice that I have some new options here on the bottom. So here I've configured it to open in the same browser tab, which I like to do if I am using this to drill down to another tab within the same dashboard. I think it's a good experience for my users to choose this option. However, if I'm maybe launching an opportunity in Salesforce or some other application, then oftentimes I'd like to do that as a new browser tab. So I can kind of flip back and forth between them and maybe open additional tabs via the actions. So depending on the type of experience that you want to give for your users, you can control that here. So for instance, if I change this one to be a new browser tab instead, now as I go make one of these selections, it opens in a new browser tab. Our next feature is hiding columns in tables. So within the table visualization type, you can include columns in the visual, but hide them from the actual display. So why would I want to do this? So the biggest reason that I'd want to do this is there might be a column that I want to use in a URL action, but it's kind of a cryptic ID and it's something that I don't necessarily want to show to the users, so I want to hide that column. But I still need it as part of the visual so that I can use it in the URL action. That's a very common reason to do this. So for an example of opening a Salesforce page via the URL action, I could include that Salesforce ID, hide the column. So I'm maybe just showing the account name or the contact name. But when I click on that row, I actually use the ID column, which is hidden, to go launch that URL. So let's look at how this one works. So here on my table visualization, on any one of the columns I have in my table here, I can click on the headers and choose to hide that column. So you may be asking, how do I get that column back if I wanted to, if the header's not there? So if you go to the same column up here in your field wells, you can either show that one column or show all the columns that you had hidden. Now, similarly, you could also hide the column directly from the field well as well, instead of doing it from the visual. So again, the common use case for this is maybe I will have an ID column that I want to use in a URL action, but I don't want to have to show it to the users. So like my ID column as an example, I'm going to hide that one. But if I go to add a URL action here, we'll see that that order ID column is still available to me as I start to build out this URL action. So this next one is a quick one. The ability to duplicate visuals within an analysis. So it's a more of a minor feature, but has huge implications in terms of just productivity of being an author in QuickSight. I'll say that I've already saved probably multiple hours using this feature just within the last couple of weeks. Um, so on any visualization that you have, in the menu for that, you'll find a new option to be able to duplicate that visual. And you can duplicate it either to the same sheet or to one of your other sheets. So it's going to make an exact copy of it. All of the formatting, all of the fields that you're using, any other properties that you had set on it. If you have a filter applied that is not a dashboard or a sheet-wide filter, the filter will come along with it. If you had sheet-wide filters applied, that filter won't be applied if you move this to a new sheet. So just be aware of that if you have some more kind of global filters. Um, just because when you duplicate it to the new sheet, we're not sure if you wanted to apply all the same global filters to that new sheet. So just something to be aware of. So let's take a look at how this works. Particularly useful in combination with the new sheets feature. So for instance, maybe I wanted to go make a new sheet here for my finance department. And there was one visualization from here that I at least want to start with when I move over to that other one. So for instance, this line chart here. So I'll use this menu and say I want to duplicate the visual, and I can either duplicate it to this sheet. So I'll show you how that one works first, where it just puts it on the bottom, or I'm going to duplicate it over to my new sheet, which is for finance. Great, so I've got an exact copy of that, still has my forecasting applied, same formatting, same fields in the field wells, so it's an exact copy. So really useful, particularly if you create dashboards that sometimes look like this, where you've got many copies and maybe it's just different filters applied or a different metric that you're using within the visual, and you've done a lot of formatting to it. It just saves you tons and tons of time to be able to copy and duplicate these visuals. Angled axis labels. So angled axis labels is the ability on your X, if you have charts with an x-axis that you're using a dimension on, could be dates, could be countries, could be any kind of categorical information. Previously, QuickSight would always put the labels horizontally. And for a bar chart like we see in the screenshot here, if you had long names, you would only get labels for every, 2, 3, 4th, or 5th point. So the ability to angle these allows you to label all of the individual data points individually. So you have a lot of customization around around the angles that are actually displayed there. So you can leave it on auto select, you can choose 30, 45, or 60 degrees, or you can go vertical as well. And you can also use horizontal, which was kind of the previous behavior. So let's take a look at how this one works. So even on this new finance chart that we had duplicated over here, maybe I want to change this into a bar chart. So notice that immediately it applies the angled labels for me. So this will be the new default when you have dense bar charts here. If you come into the formatting options under x-axis, this is where you're going to find those options. So previously, it used to look like this. So you would only get labels every so often. And you had to hover over the point to basically find out which point that one was. You know, for something like time, you can kind of infer it, but if these were states, for instance, you would have no idea which state was in between these. So the ability to angle them at 45 or 60, 30 vertically, so you have a lot of more control over how to actually display all that data to your users. So a small feature, but a very, very important one. So we have a completely new visualization type being added, which is the gauge chart. So gauges are useful for when you're trying to compare two different metrics, particularly around performance. So this could be uh, actual versus plan, versus a goal, versus a target of some sort, and to be able to show progress towards that target. So they're very familiar to us from driving vehicles, and they look kind of like a speedometer in your car. So very familiar to everybody, and a popular type of visualization to add to your dashboards as well. So here's a few examples of what the gauge charts look like from the reader perspective. So there's a few different styles that you can choose from when you're building these out. As you apply filters, all of the numbers in here would update. So like if I wanted to go add a new filter here, even let's go add industry as an example. And so all of my numbers in here are going to be reflective of that. So this is what it feels like from the reader perspective. And now let's take a look at creating a gauge chart from scratch. So we'll start this as a new tab. So you have a new visualization type over here for the gauge chart. The types of fields that it asks for are two metrics. So one which is the actual and one which is the target. So I can let's use sales as an example for my actuals. And for my target, you can either have a target field that is part of your data, or if you don't, you can just add a calculated field which has a constant within it. So I'm saying here is my goal, and it's just kind of a constant number. Or you could use an if statement and say if region equals east, then this is the target. If it equals west, then this is a target. So you can even kind of make more targets per some dimension too. But anyway, if you have some field in the data which contains these targets, then you're going to add them into the visualization this way. Quick note, if you are using this method of kind of doing it as a constant, this is going to be repeated for every row of data I have. So rather than summing those all up, I would want to choose min or max or average. They'll all give me the same result. So now that's my actual value that I put in my constant there. So here within the formatting options for this visual, I can change which value is actually displayed. So that's what's changing here in the middle. I could say I don't want to put anything in the middle, or I want to put the actual value of this field. or comparison. So I want to compare these two values together. And then if I'm doing a comparison, do I want to show it as a percentage of the difference between the two, or the difference represented as a percentage? You can turn on or off the labels that go around the outside. You can change the angles at which the gauge starts and ends. So 180 would be a semicircle, and then you can kind of keep going around all the way to a full circle. Thickness will change the actual thickness of that circle itself, of the gauge itself. And the padding in the ranges, so for instance, I have my goal set here at 40 million. I'm hoping that we go past 40 million, so I want to actually leave some additional room there to show how far past we went. And while it would still be reflected in the number, I want to actually put some padding on here too. So let's put 20% of padding beyond there. So here is where my actual goal is, but we've added another 20% to this gauge here. And similarly, I could customize the range to exactly where I wanted it to go if I choose this option instead. So we can duplicate that guy. Maybe this goal is my quarterly goal. I have a different one that's my monthly goal. And I could display those both out here on my dashboard. So quick walkthrough on how to use the new gauge chart. In addition to the gauge chart, we've also added a new visualization called a donut chart in this release. So donut charts are very good for showing when you want to display contributions of individual parts to the whole. Very similar to how you would use a pie chart or a stacked bar chart. It in fact looks very similar to a pie chart, just aesthetically a little bit different. And it also includes the ability to include the total in the middle of the donut that we see here. So let's jump over to QuickSight and see how we build a donut chart. So here you can see a couple that I had already set up, but let's go ahead and add a new visual here. You can see a new visuals type right next to the gauge called the donut chart. So I'm going to select that. The types of fields that it asks for the field wells are one value and one dimension to be the group by for the color. So if I wanted to start with one of my metrics, and let's go add something like segment. So here we can see that I have my 3 different slices labeled by the actual segments themselves. But if you come in here into the formatting options, you can change the size or thickness of the donut itself. If you'd like to show or hide the total in the middle. And then similar to the pie chart visual, you can control should the data labels be displayed inside or outside, the size of them, the color, as well as what do you actually want to display on the labels. So here you can put the category, which is represented on your legend, and or the metric. So you can choose which ones you want to show. If it's more of a dense chart type, meaning that you have more slices that we can't necessarily fit all the labels, you can force the labels to overlap. And if I were to replace this segment with industry, for instance, notice that we don't try and draw some of these. And then you can force it if you would like by saying you'd like them to overlap. Usually I like to uncheck that unless I know that there's definitely enough room for it. All right, so that's a quick tutorial on how to leverage the brand new donut charts. So there's a number of new calculated field functions that have been added. There's been improvements to some of the existing calculated field functions, as well as some additions of some that existed for direct query but were not yet supported in Spice. So first, to start with the brand new functions. So variance and standard deviations are kind of the theme of these new functions, and there's lots of different iterations of them. So standard deviation if, which is I can do kind of conditional standard deviation aggregations. Standard deviation over is a table calculation, which would be computed across many data points in my visual. And then similarly those same, but using population variance for them. Those same exact set of 6 functions will exist for variance as well. So these are available to you as just pure aggregations as well as table calculations. So the next function is dateDiff. So dateDiff has always existed, but the return of what a dateDiff function gave back was always measured in days. And if you wanted to measure dateDiff in weeks or years, you had to do a little bit of math beyond that to convert it into whatever you'd like. So now you can specify exactly how you want the dateDiff to be measured in years, quarters, all the way down to second level. So it just makes um, a lot easier and more kind of powerful kind of results you can get from that. And finally, the addition of the if-else function when you're using Spice. This has been a frequently asked for update to Spice. We're very happy to have this in there for you now. You could always use if-else if you were in the data prep screen, but if you were in the analysis, if you're using Spice, the if-else function wasn't available to you, but if you're using direct query, it was. So just having complete parity between the functions that you find if you're using Spice or if you're using the direct query. So extremely useful. I find myself using this if-else function basically on a daily basis, pretty much. So very happy that it's in there in Spice now, and there for all of you guys to leverage as well. All right, that concludes our presentation for some of the features that we'll be adding here in June 2019. Hope you're able to make good use of them, and we will see you next month for our next update. Thank you.